Yeah, so one of the things that has made our efforts to raise awareness around this and to protest against this more complicated is that they have written into Article 13 an exemption for any non-profit encyclopedias. There's only one really, that's Wikipedia. So we have a direct exemption from Article 13, which I think they thought would shut us up, because I think they really understood that we are the one group of people who are genuinely a community. These things don't get decided top down. So, for example, the protest yesterday was in the German, Czech, Danish, and Slovak Wikipedias. Other Wikipedia language versions are still discussing what they may or may not do, but these things come from the communities. They control that. That's not controlled by me or by the Wikipedia Foundation. And so we do have a loud voice because people do love Wikipedia and they love the gift that we've given. So it hasn't shut us up at all. We are very unhappy about this. And we're unhappy about it because we are fundamentally about internet users. We're fundamentally about an open internet, about the free sharing of knowledge. And we find that this approach to dealing with issues that have to do really with the negotiating stance of, for example, the music industry and YouTube, which, by the way, when I've spoken to people, music industry representatives, this is their number one concern. They would like to get more money out of Google. Okay, well that's really, sorry Google, but that's your problem. And if there's a way to get more money out of YouTube, that's fine. I actually think the bigger problem in the music industry is that of the revenue that the music industry receives, only 8% or so goes to the artists. So when the music industry comes forward with a sob story about artists, I think there's a deeper issue there around how are artists properly compensated. But I want to talk just about a couple of specific examples. I was speaking to the owner of, heard from the owner of a small internet message board that's all about Tolkien's works, so Lord of the Rings. And so this is a community of people who discuss the movies, they discuss the books, they discuss the whole Tolkien universe, they discuss other sort of fantasy, fiction, and so on. Well, this copyright directive has an exemption for small and medium enterprises. However, the exemption is so badly done that it applies, you no longer qualify if you've existed for 3 years. It doesn't matter how much your revenue is. If you've been around for 3 years, then you are subject to the exact same regulations as Google, Facebook, Twitter, and all the internet giants. So this owner of this message board is deeply concerned because he has a safe harbor right now. If any of his users shares a picture from a movie or a short clip or something longer, he's not liable for that, and if he gets a takedown notice, then he has to take it down. And that system has worked very, very well for a long time. Now he will be potentially liable from the moment that's uploaded, unless he proactively buys licenses to everything that anybody might possibly upload, or if he finds some kind of way of having some kind of technology. But this is really a bit of a fantasy, because it's one thing for Google to identify a whole track of music, and even for Google, questions around what constitutes fair use are very difficult to algorithmically address. And certainly for a small message board, the only thing you can really do is disable uploads, or, and I think this is an interesting thing for those of us who live in Europe, I live in the UK, if you go right now in the UK, and I assume there as well, and you try to visit the Chicago Tribune's website. Chicago Tribune is the largest and most important paper in Chicago in the United States. You can't see it from Europe, and the reason is GDPR. And GDPR is a far more sensible set of regulations than the new copyright directive. But what's likely is that a lot of sites, and I'm talking about the big giants, a lot of sites are going to simply block Europe, and so you may not be able to visit this Lord of the Rings message board anymore. The other thing that's likely to happen, if you're the owner of this small community website, you're not really making any money on it. Maybe you've got a few ads up to help cover your costs. Maybe you make $100 a month, and it's your hobby, and you've got a little bit of a hobby income. Well, you're going to think, you know what, it isn't worth it. It isn't worth the risk, because the penalties could run into quite serious amounts of money. And so what you may say is, sorry everybody, we're going to have to move and we're going to have to become a Facebook group, and we'll let Facebook deal with the legal risk. So there is a very strong chance that the smaller, more authentic, older places on the internet will be very directly threatened and actually will be pushed in the direction of having to go for the bigger platforms. The other thing to look at and worry about, and one of the things that we do worry about in Europe and should worry about, is the question of entrepreneurship. If I were advising a young entrepreneur who were doing something around community-generated content, I would say to them, you know what, Europe's about to become a very difficult jurisdiction for you. You may want to consider launching in the United States instead. And that's a terrible thing to have to say when Europe badly needs innovation and the growth of new resources and so forth. Well, I could go on for hours, but I think I'll just stop there and we can carry on.
I do have at least one follow-up question at this stage. I mean, thank you for this outlining of a number of issues of principle, and I think I can follow all of what you said, but one of the things that's worried, or that's made me wonder really, as I'm trying to get my mind around the issues involved, is the people who are going to be impacted by this, I think, on the consumer end, tend to be the people we refer to as the millennials, who really use these, who basically exist in a bubble of sharing and God knows what else. But I mean, I rarely see any reference to them. I don't think they've been given a voice in this. I don't think anybody wants to give them a voice. But you mentioned the word community, and this is what I'm not driving at. What would you say needs to be done, or can be done to get the community, to get actually people involved in this? And why aren't they out in the streets protesting? Because this seems to me to be a massive change coming, and yet I see so little public awareness.
Well, I think one of the problems is when you sit someone down and you start to say, let me tell you about the new European Copyright Directive, you have to like poke them a couple of times to wake them up again, because you just said the most boring thing in history. But you know, we see this everywhere. I mean, certainly here in the UK, millennials are very upset about Brexit, and the truth is, when the vote happened, they didn't vote. Young people don't turn out to vote in as many numbers as they should, and getting their awareness and attention to come out on the streets is always difficult. And of course, there are planned protests across Europe for this Saturday. I don't think that's going to be really feasible here in the UK, because hopefully we're going to see millions of people out protesting Brexit, which is obviously massively occupying the news attention these days, which is correctly so. And so unfortunately these issues get a little bit slipped under the rug, and it's a really hard thing. And so for Wikipedia, I guarantee you all the kids who are trying to do their homework yesterday noticed in Germany that Wikipedia was down, and they read about it, and now they've learned about it. But unfortunately, it's quite late in the game, and it's hard for them to make their voices known to the members of European Parliament. That actually, what I think should be done here is to vote through most of the package is fine. There's some perfectly sensible modernization going on, new protections for public domain. But if we could vote down Article 13 and Article 11 to give a pause, to go back to the drawing board and say, look, what are we really trying to accomplish? And can't we accomplish that without doing fundamental damage to the openness of the internet?
Thank you. Jan Adorn is a member of the European Parliament who